Hi, this is Brandon Browneye, and thank you for tuning in to the newest episode of The Transition Expert. Today's guest is going to be Tracy, and she's going to be joining us to talk about her issues with her father and how he's gotten older and those changes and adjustments in the family dynamic and how she's become successful in getting the family support to make some tough decisions. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Thank you. I'd like to welcome today's guest, Tracy.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, Tracy. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Thank you. Listen, thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Not a problem.
So I wanted to welcome you to the show to obviously talk a little bit about what's going on in your family and what recently transpired. So if you can sort of share with the viewers what happened recently.
Sure. Recently, my father, who's 70 years old, he had a really quick acute mental change in status in his dementia. Mm-hmm. It was diagnosed a few years ago. And as of recently, like I said, it became it quickly changed where the amount of planning that was put in place, it just kind of all went out the window. So we're just kind of taking everything a step at a time to get things into place.
Okay. Now, when did you start noticing some changes in your father?
The first time, I always say like my spider senses started tingling was about around the time before I got married. I got married in 2014. Around 2013 was when I kind of noticed that he would be a little bit repetitive. A lot of times he would kind of be a little bit more forgetful than normal. So that's around that time that I kind of took notice of it.
Where did you guys grow up?
We grew up in Brockton. Me and my the sibling.
Do you have a big family?
Not really. Our family is pretty small but tight knit. We do have extended family members like cousins, a lot of family friends and whatnot.
What was it like growing up with your father? What was his personality, demeanor like?
He was very strict. I think for me, because I was the only girl, and then plus being of Haitian, Caribbean background, that also adds on to it. But there were moments where, you would kind of walk on eggshells a little bit because of that sternness. You didn't want to get on his bad side, but there were good qualities about him where you would have moments where, you would go out, have fun with him. And he was always very transparent about whatever wisdom that he would share with myself and my older siblings.
Mm-hmm. What did he do for work?
He was a CNA, other times a home health aide.
Okay, so did he work with obviously he worked with a lot of elderly clients and so forth?
Correct.
Do you think it's kind of ironic in a sense that, him working in that field and finding himself in a similar situation so early?
Yeah, it really is. I also work in the healthcare field as a nurse full time. And even before I was a nurse, I was a CNA for a few years. My mom was a CNA for over 28 years. So I pretty much grew up around that setting. Mm-hmm. And you already know what signs to look for when it comes to dementia. But yes, it is very ironic when you work in that setting and then the next couple of years later, you end up either getting it or you end up having someone in your family that has it.
How old is your father, by the way?
He is 70.
And when do you think you started to see the beginning, the early symptoms, early signs?
If there were any signs prior to that, I probably wouldn't have caught up on it. Mostly because we lived together until 2009 before he moved and lived on his own. Anytime between 2009 and 2013, I really wouldn't have been able to pick on it because I was very busy around that time. When you're busy, you don't pick up on certain things like that. But it isn't until you kind of sit down and like really observe the person, like I did on 2013, that's when you really pick up certain, you know, abnormal things that you're not used to seeing them doing.
Now, does any of these things run in the family? Have you noticed any issues with his mom or anybody on his side?
No, I haven't really heard of anything like that in either sides of my family, to be honest with you. If anything, my grandmother, who's still living, she's like in her 90s, but her mind is still with it. She just has normal memory, like slight moments of memory loss. But for him, at his young age, at 70, I think it just kind of mostly revolves around stressors, I would say. Stress, being alone for a little bit, that can kind of add on to it. So he probably had it, but it never really showed its face until his environment changed.
When did you become concerned?
Oh gosh, early on. The moment that I took notice of it, I kind of started mentioning it. I'm like, hey guys, I kind of noticed that he's acting out of, the normal. I think he probably is showing some type of signs of dementia. What do you guys think? And of course, naturally, by saying the word dementia around family, they kind of get a little offended. Like, what are you talking about? What do you mean dementia? He looks perfectly fine. He looks normal.
So at what point, when did it worsen? When was the worst? When was the climax?
I would say it was way more noticeable. I would say two years ago for Thanksgiving. He was just acting very very awkward. Just not acting like his usual self. And then again, it just became its worst as of this May.
What happened in May?
Life cycle sort of encompasses and embodies that nature of how we adjust to change. Life cycle clients range from the son or daughter taking care of the affairs for their mom or dad, from a recent retiree anticipating getting their house ready for sale and all the hassles and hurdles that they're going to have to take a home that's been in the family for 30, 40 years, or to a client that maybe struggled with hoarding, and don't quite know who to call or how to call to get help. We're the family when the family isn't there. Whether it's just too much of a daunting task for your loved ones or yourself to handle, you contact us. We answer the call, and they're definitely the solution for you.
In May of this year, while he was alone in his apartment, I guess it was earlier in the morning, he took a printer, put it on the stove, turned the stove on. The printer melted, and then it caused a lot of smoke to build up in his apartment, which ended up causing his neighbors to call for assistance.
Now, what happened when the first responders arrived?
The social worker told me that he was extremely confused when they were asking him questions. He wasn't making much sense to them. He didn't understand what he did, why he did it. He didn't have the ability to properly respond to them. He speaks perfectly good English. But at that time, it was kind of like a mix of English and Hatian Creole, other times French. So they were like, okay, something's not right. We have to take you.
Where did they take him?
They took him to the hospital that was in the town, Brockton Hospital.
Okay. And they took him under evaluation?
Yeah. They ended up having to admit him because of his change in mental status at that time. They figured he wasn't safe to be alone. So that was when I ended up getting a bunch of phone calls, and then I had to rush straight over there.
So what was the thought at that point? What were you feeling at that point?
Oh my God, so many different emotions hit me all at once. First of all, I was on my way to work. I was gonna leave my house to head right to work, and my older brother called me because I missed the phone call, and he called me because he got the call. And he's like, okay, Dad's in the emergency room. You got to get to him right now because he's out of state. He can't get there. So I have my mom with me and my mother-in-law with me at the time with the kids. And I have to kind of, put on a fake smile and be like, okay, guys, I'm going to work. Bye. And then I run out the door and then I'm heading to the ER. I'm bawling up in the car because I'm like, God, what's going on? I'm hearing he's in the emergency room. I don't know for what. And it wasn't until as I was on my way there, that's when they explained to me, okay, the incident that happened at the time. And even so, it's you kind of get that breaking point emotionally where it's like, okay, it's all starting to become too real and too much right now.
Now, besides his mental health at this point, which you're obviously thinking it's beginning of the earlier stages of dementia, or it can be Alzheimer's, all we knew at that point. Mm-hmm. Has your father had any physical issues, any health issues physically?
The only issues he's had physically was just, something simple like knee replacement surgery, arthritis in his hands. That's it. Other than that, nothing major.
So what were some of the challenges in the decision-making process at this point, now that you realize that, you got to the hospital, your father's in the ER, you don't know what's happening, you're trying to piece together all these situations. Who's greeting you? Who's talking to you? Is there a social worker, elder services rep?
The social worker there was awesome. She was very, she was very great with communicating with me with everything that was going on. The only thing that really was painful was the waiting process, because they're dealing with a patient in the triage who's being behavioral at the time. So to protect whoever has a family member at the triage, they can't allow them to enter. So I ended up waiting in the waiting room for almost 2 hours, which was grueling. And then the really emotional part at that time too was the fact, again, I work in healthcare. I'm a nurse. I deal with doing MOLS, which is like a Massachusetts document that you fill out when you want your family member to be like a DNR, do not resuscitate, DNH, do not hospitalize, DNI, do not incubate, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sitting in that same position as the family members of residents that I'm always helping on a regular basis. Now, I'm that family member of a patient who has to be put on a MOLS, and I have to make decisions. Okay, do I want them to resuscitate him if his heart was to stop? Things like that. Doing all of those things and invoking a healthcare proxy, I was like, wow, this is unreal right now. That was a lot.
It's funny. The table's now turning. So it's like you do this instinctively and professionally from your career, and now you're finding yourself on the other end of the table trying to make decisions on your loved one. Were you his health proxy? Did you have all those things lined up ahead of time?
I was he made me his emergency contact because the relationship with my father wasn't all that great ever since he moved away. We lost touch for a bit. I automatically assumed that he was always independent, so I really needed to get involved with stuff. I was mostly involved with a lot of my mother's healthcare stuff because her memory, she remembers her own personal information, but there are certain things she does not have the ability to do independently because of her lack of education. Whereas my father, he's a little bit more educated than she was, so he can do things on his own without a problem. So when it came to knowing his social security number, knowing his current mailing address, knowing date of birth, all this other information that you really need, I didn't really have that. I knew his birthday. I could figure out his mailing address, but social security number, having access to his bank account, if God forbid something was to happen, things like that. You don't know about these things that you need to have access to because you weren't taught any of that information. It isn't until you get into healthcare as within a management position or something like that, you have the knowledge of it. But it wasn't until recently I'm like, shoot, I need to have that information. But again, everything happened so fast, I didn't even have a chance to even blink.
Wow. So you finally get to your father. You're in the hospital, ER, I'm assuming at this point. How was his mental? How was he responding?
Oh my gosh, he was knocked out. He was completely snowed. They had to give him as needed medication, which you call PRNs, just to kind of calm his mind down. And the effects of those meds they make you really sleepy. So, for example, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of an Ativan. An Ativan is what kind of helps you with agitation or anxiety, something
Mhm.
like that. You're not used to having that in your system. It'll knock you out on your behind. So to
So,
see him laying straight, he was knocked out.
so when did you ever have, how long did it take for you to have an opportunity to talk to him? And when you did talk to him, what was that conversation like?
The entire time that I was there with him, it took my entire day. He, even when he was waking up, he didn't even really realize that I was there really. It wasn't until the following day when I had the time to have a day off from work to go and see him at the hospital again. That's when we were able to kind of have kind of a conversation. But at first, he was a little bit confused. He didn't realize it was me because, you know, with
Mhm.
the mask, everything that you're wearing, he's thinking I'm a stranger or a friend. And then when I kind of slightly took my mask down so he could see my face, he was like, "Oh, my daughter, my darling, my sweetie."
So you're now getting through to him. He's starting to come through. You're able to have a conversation to him. You got some pretty tough decisions to make at this point. What were some of the decisions that were coming across your mind at this point?
Wow. Everything was coming a billion at a time. I'm thinking of, okay, I need to figure out about his apartment because he can't live there safely on his own. First things first, I need to figure out housing for him because, again, he can't live on his own safely. He has to go to a long-term care facility now. People of color, they're afraid of things like that. They want to stay home with their family. They want to die in their home. That's the mentality that they have. So being in a long-term care facility is the last thing on their mind. But safety wise, behavioral wise, it's like I don't have a choice in the matter.
Now you mentioned that. That's a good point to talk about. Earlier on, you said that the family were sort of like, when it came to wondering if dad had issues with dementia. When it was brought forth, it was kind of like taboo. Can you tell me
Mm-hmm.
what it's like in your culture as it pertains to dealing with mental health issues?
When it comes to dealing with mental health in my community, it's like I can't necessarily say that they kind of push it under the table because every household is different. Some people, they have the mentality of, you know what, we're not going to talk about it. It doesn't happen. It never happened. It what it is. It's whatever. My family, it was more like, okay, they were kind of in denial about it because by looking at him, he didn't look like as if it was somebody with dementia. Dementia is a big umbrella. There are different forms of it. Some people look normal to you if there's a real definition of normal. Some people have a lot of behaviors that you pick up on real quick. For him, he didn't really have that many behaviors. If anything, he looked normal, but you could pick up that he was very repetitive, extremely forgetful, had a lot of weight loss that was happening rapidly because he wasn't remembering to eat. He wasn't taking his meds like he was supposed to. So it's like they couldn't get it because they weren't around it. And until the day it happened when they kind of noticed that he wasn't acting right. And I kept kind of showing to them like, listen, look at these signs. He has dementia. These are the meds that he's on. Then they were like, kind of like, okay, we're kind of getting it. But it wasn't
Right.
until he was hospitalized. That's when they really got the point.
Well, I mean, that's unfortunate because a lot of times when it comes to mental health issues, um, people are hesitant to go get help for mental health. And they're a lot more susceptible or comfortable going to their primary care or even going to the emergency room and say, look, I cut my arm off or I shot myself in the foot with a nail, than they are to go into a hospital or talk to their primary care or make a phone call and say, something's not right. I'm not feeling right. I'm feeling depressed. I feel anxious. I need to talk to someone. That's a conversation that me and you think is a lot easier to have. But for people to do it on their own, it's virtually impossible. Statistics have shown that it's very difficult for people to go and get help on their own. which is why the
Yes.
support base is so important, that the people who are around you, who are observing these subtle changes in your personality and your mood swings and your behavior, to speak up and to step forth, but they have to feel comfortable. But when you look at the cultural element that you talked about before, having a situation where he himself, probably in the case that he was, isn't going to wave his hand and say, I'm forgetting things, I'm noticing a change in me, I need help. He's going to rely on the people around him. And the person that was more inept or more in tune with some of those changes were you. But it didn't sound like, because of the cultural issues that you were dealing with, or not really issues, but the cultural indifferences, rather, you were getting that support to support him. And that got to be pretty difficult, right?
Oh my gosh, it's so hard because, and I took notice to that too. It's not even just me. It's a lot of people, and not even just the Caribbean or African American culture, Caucasian, everybody. Like, if you spend some time in healthcare, you notice that there's always that one sibling who ends up being stuck having to take care of everything. And even if you have another one who's in charge of being a power of attorney or being a healthcare proxy, it gets to a point where they have to leave that to the next person that's able to be more responsible in regards to all of that stuff, let alone being more emotionally strong to be able to handle it, because financially is one thing, but to be emotionally stable is another thing.
Right. I mean, a lot of what I do as a transition expert is giving advice, direction, resources. Our focus is helping people, or my focus rather, is helping people help mentally, physically, and emotionally. I get the call in more cases like your father, where there's a slip, there's a fall, and typically the process is EMS is called, whether it's because of a wellness check of a concerned loved one that calls and couldn't get a hold of mom or dad, or the person themselves call and EMS comes. They then discover and recognize some issues in the home, presumably the person who was injured first. Then they do a walk through the home, room to room, and they recognize that this living condition is hazardous. Now, for many of my clients that are watching this episode, or the family members that have concerns about loved ones, how do the transition expert or companies like me get involved? Well, just like that. The EMS is called, they're first responders. First responders are the fire department, the medical, the EMSs. They go to the home, they acknowledge these issues, and they're considered in the industry as mandatory reporters. Mandatory reporters are mandated by state law to report if they notice any issues in a home, such as hazards, trip hazards, health concerns, fires, you name it. They then notify, in your father's case, because he's 70 years old, they'll notify elder services. Elder services will then open up a case file, and they'll now say this client, this situation, this circumstance, and so on and so forth. So in the case where maybe there's a hoarding situation, I'm just using hoarding because hoarding is one of the options that a service like ours would be called upon. They notice that there's a hoarding situation, and then they notify the person, the next of kin, the loved ones. Do you have any family members? And the person who was living in this condition for 10, 12, 13, 30 years, they thought because they closed the blinds, they never let anyone in, their secret, their surprise would never be, revealed. But unfortunately now it is. And now they're currently being hospitalized, and they're from being hospitalized. Once their care is under control, they're sent to a rehab so that they can get care and get back on their feet and hopefully return home. They now have to deal with a discharge planner and a social worker, and those are the individuals that are now looking at this case file that was created by the first responders or the mandatory reporters that now acknowledge these living conditions. So before they can discharge your mom, your dad, or even the person who's watching this episode, they now need to do a health check in the home. So they might, before they even discharge you, go to the home or ask permission to go to your home. Because what you're going to need now at this point in your father's situation is you're going to need to get in-home care. And in most cases where the living environment has been compromised, the in-home care services are provided by a third party, which is a private entity. that has their own stipulations and requirements in order for them to administer adequate services. They want a healthy, clean living environment so that their staff doesn't get harmed or exposed to something that could be, toxic or detrimental to their health. In a case like your father's living situation, we knew he was struggling with mental health, but what was his living condition at this point?
Oh, it was horrible. I think his living conditions was one of the reasons why his anxiety level was so high, and probably even depression. Because imagine being on your own, you have dementia. Unfortunately, he was a hoarder, big time. He's been like that since I was a kid, but it was under control. But growing up, we didn't know the word for it. It was always, okay, I'm going to collect stuff and I'm going to send it overseas to family. But there were so many things that he would forget about, and it would just stay there for years collecting dust.
Right.
And even his current hoarding situation that he had, it's not like as if he kind of hid it. It
Right.
was, if you were invited into his home, it wasn't a big deal. He wasn't really ashamed of it because he didn't see anything wrong about it. It was just, okay, well, I need to get rid of this stuff and go send it overseas. But it became so much of a habit. It just became worse. Collection upon collections. And then you just see boxes wrapped up in plastic wrapper, things like that, just to send overseas. It was just a bit much.
Yeah, and the misconception that a lot of people get when they think of what the transition expert does or life cycle transitions does as a whole is they think that we're a hoarding cleanup company or a junk removal company, and not that we're far from that. We're a transition company, because how you do anything is often how you do everything. And for one to believe that a person struggling with some mental health issues that their other elements of their life aren't going to be affected. So most of the time, if you're looking at an indication of something going wrong, then you're going to see it in more ways than one. You're going to see it in their car. You're going to see it in their clothing. They're going to come off slightly disheveled at times. The apartment being what it is doesn't always have to be hoarding. It could just be the neglect or the effects of whatever he's dealing with mentally that's manifesting itself in a physical form, which may come out in a form of neglect. Mm-hmm. In his case, you knew that the living situation was affected by obviously what he was going through. Was there any thought that you thought for 1 second that he was going to be able to return to this home?
Well, the original plan was for him to get care while he was at home. I had his insurance set up. I was getting plans to have, plenty of assistance with his meds, with cooking and cleaning, things like that, home care. But ever since he had that major transition within his dementia, where it just became really bad, it got to a point where I realized, okay, I'm not going to put myself in denial. I have to kind of be honest with the fact that, okay, he can't safely live on his own unless he has somebody with him 24/7. And if he can't have 24/7 assistance at home where somebody's practically living with him and helping take care of him, then there's no way. So,
right. It's interesting because most of the time my clients, which are the son or the daughters that are getting these calls, they have lives of their own. They have a wife, they have kids, they have a career, and then all of a sudden they get hit with issues with their parents. And most of the time they're in their early 80s. Your father is a little early, being in his early 70s. But they get hit with this responsibility. And it comes in different forms. It comes in a sense of, of a burden. No one wants to admit that, this situation's burdensome because they love their loved ones and they don't want to ever feel that way. It comes in a sense of regret, and they feel that they're not doing enough. They feel guilty. Did you feel any of these emotions in at some point or another, knowing that you had this big responsibility and big choices on your hand?
All the time. It's a whirlwind of emotions. You feel guilt sometimes because you wonder, okay, are you doing enough? Are you doing things quick enough? Because every time you try to take 5 steps forward, there's always something blocking you and pushing you 10 steps back, where you have to start at the finish line. Not even at the finish line, at the start line again. Mm-hmm. And then you're feeling moments of aggravation, because you want to spend time with your kids, but that time that you have that you could be spending with your kids, you may need to use that time to try to declutter the apartment or go spend time with him so he's not feeling any kind of way. And then you feel guilt when it comes to your kids, when it comes to managing your home, because you're neglecting your own home now, or even yourself. You become afraid because you wonder, okay, my God, my dad is going through this right now. Am I going to get it when I get to his age? Is stress going to bring me to that point in my life? What is it that I need to do to make sure that I don't get that way? And sometimes anger too, because you're like, okay, I'm the youngest of three. From my father and my mother's marriage together, they have myself and my older brother. And sometimes it makes you a little upset because you're like, I'm the youngest. I should be able to enjoy my life a little bit. But no, everyone else has to take care of their own lives. And I kind of get stuck with the burden of having to take care of everyone else.
Right. And that's usually what I get a lot of. I always sense a lot of resentment in the family dynamic, because either someone's further away from the problem, someone's too close to it. One person's, not very close to the family at all. Every family has their own unique dynamic on who's going to be anointed or appointed to be the person to take care of the loved one in question. In your case, you were appointed. You were the anointed one. You were the one that was given the responsibility. And then sometimes resentment forms from that because you're like, look, I'm willing to do my part, but can someone else help do that part? Has your support base changed, Tracy, since your father's been hospitalized, since the incident that happened in May? Has much changed with people now taking this situation a little more seriously?
Yeah, they've taken it a lot more seriously. My older sibling, whenever he has a chance, he'll call and check to see how he's doing. My immediate family, we try to do whatever it is that we can when it comes to, showing whatever type of support that we can for him. In the end of the day, everything is still on my shoulders because I can say that they see me as being the more responsible one. So because they see you as the more responsible person who can handle all the stuff, then you don't have a choice but to deal with it and just try to persevere in the end.
Definitely. Heavy hangs the head that wears the crown. Too much is given, much is tested. I think the reason why you were given this opportunity is because, someone above believed you can handle it. What advice would you give to families that have gone through or going through what you're going through now?
Don't lie to yourself. Don't be in denial. Sometimes if you see something, a yellow flag, believe that maybe there is something underlying that hasn't fully showed itself yet. When things become a lot stressful, it's okay to cry. There's nothing wrong with crying and having a moment to just kind of vent. And also, as soon as you can, even if you don't have the chance to do it now, but you don't know what might happen tomorrow, as soon as you can, get as much information as you can on your loved one. Know their social, know their birthday. If they don't live with you, know their current address by heart. If you don't have the finances to become a power of attorney, see if you can be able to be added onto their bank account so that if something was to happen, you don't have to wait until you have a death certificate in your hand to show them, okay, well, I can have access to it. Same thing as healthcare proxy. You want to get something like that put in place and know what they want if something was to happen to them, because in the end of the day, when something like this happens, you're going to be kind of stuck. So you have to be emotionally and physically prepared for it.
Well said. Well said. Thank you so very much for being on the show today. What we wanted to do on this episode is to point out awareness in the sense that to be proactive is much better than to be reactionary. Knowing what's going on with your loved ones is so important. If you, like you said, getting on their bank account, being aware of their doctor's appointments, if you're able to get an in-depth understanding as to what's going on, then you'll be able to in a better position to communicate and facilitate things need be when the opportunity comes about. You don't want to be in a situation like Tracy was at some point in the earlier part where she's getting a rushed call from something happening. So we all want to be proactive. Now, knowing what you know now, at this point, where is your father going to go? What's the goal for him now?
The goal right now is because in a nursing home they don't really allow them to really leave the facility like that. But so far I was able to get an appointment set up for him so that he can be reevaluated by a psych doctor and get an order put in place so that he can be able to leave the premises and spend time with family. Of course, go back when he's done, but at least be able to be around family whenever he can, instead of just being stuck in a facility. You know what I mean? Be around familiar faces. The goal is also for him to be a little bit closer to home. I'm hoping, by the grace of God, to get him from where he is now and to bring him closer to my area. That way we can visit him more often and hopefully have him spend more time with us as well.
You're a rock star, Tracy. I mean, I've dealt with hundreds and hundreds of situations like this. And the way that you're responding to it, just your demeanor, your intention, your heart, your goal and mind and what you want to do, and how you never let any of these things sort of waver from your love from your father. Because what I hear is daddy's little girl. And you love your father thick and thin, no matter what. And that's really what it takes. It really takes that love, because no one's going to take better care of you than the people who love you. So I know your father, no matter what he's going through, like when he was in the ER and he saw you lifted the mask, he knows his daughter is going to make sure he's okay. And I think you've done a remarkable job today. Even when we asked you to be a part of the show and be a guest, I know it was filled with a lot of intrepidation, but you did it because you understood the importance of it. Like I wanted this platform to be about letting people like you know you're not alone, to give you support, but also to educate, give awareness, and to point emphasis in the areas of mental health. The transition expert is mainly 90% about mental health, making sure that people are living in a healthy, stress-free environment is about health and wellness, and health and wellness is about being mindful. We want to be mindful in how we're feeling, what we're going through, and be vocal about when we're dealing with something, to talk about it to people that we love. In a case like your father, I think that situation could have went really bad. It could have been worse, but by the grace of God, I think it didn't. And it didn't because there were people around him in this community that noticed the situation. But when you came out there and you addressed it, I think now he's going to be in a much healthier, safe environment as a result of it. For those of you who are watching this show, I hope you learned so much from Tracy's story, her situation, her family dynamic. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of secrecies that have been hidden within four walls, and families that are going through very challenging situations that we can all learn and grow from. But we don't know because everything is on a hush hush. This new era with this new platform, with the way social media is implemented, there's no reason for that anymore. Mental health is real. What we're feeling is real. How we go through it is even realer. And we want to share those stories. And my commitment, my focus, my objective is to make sure that this show is going to continue to bring emphasis on awareness on mental health issues that we are all going through. And to focus on that starts with people like you, Tracy. From the bottom of my heart, thank you once again for being on the show. I'm sending so many positive vibes and blessings and prayers to you and your family. I think that this situation, no matter what it was, I think it brought your family closer. And I think you guys are going to grow as a result of it. Thanks again for being on the show. And this is another episode of The Transition Expert.